There's a moment you know too well. A moment where you bite your tongue, lower your voice, or pretend you didn't notice something that hurt you. The air feels heavy, almost metallic, and you can feel your own heartbeat warning you. Careful. Don't make them upset. Don't disturb the balance. You tell yourself it's not worth the argument, not worth the discomfort, not worth the risk. But deep down, you feel it. The tightening in your chest, the pressure behind your ribs, the subtle anger that never becomes fire. It just simmers. You've lived a life where you learned not to push back, where your safety depended on your ability to stay agreeable, where belonging required you to shrink yourself. They depend on your guilt. They weaponize your empathy. They manipulate the rules you were conditioned to obey. Here's the paradox. The very traits that once protected you, compliance, sensitivity, predictability, are exactly the traits people now use to control you. It's not that you're weak. It's that you were trained to survive by reading people, smoothing tensions, anticipating moods, and avoiding conflict. And people who crave power see that as an opening. They don't need to yell. They don't need to threaten. They just need to activate the old wiring inside you. A sigh, a disappointed tone, a raised eyebrow, a strategic silence, and you feel yourself slipping back into that old self, the one who apologizes first, the one who over-explains, the one who gives more than they receive. Today, we're going to expose the rules people use to control you. But more importantly, we're going to expose the childhood programming that made you vulnerable to these rules in the first place. Because once you understand these rules, you'll see them everywhere. And you will finally understand that control doesn't begin with what people do to you. It begins with what you were taught to do to yourself. To understand how people control you, we need to understand the psychological architecture behind your responses. Let's begin with 3 core concepts. First is hypervigilance. This is a trauma response where your nervous system remains on high alert. As a child, you learn to scan for danger, not physical, but emotional. A shift in tone, a slammed door, a withdrawn parent. Your brain encoded these things as warnings. So now, even as an adult, your internal alarm system fires at the slightest sign of tension. People who want control can sense this. They use unpredictability, subtle or intentional, to keep you walking on eggshells. Always guessing, always anxious. The second concept is the fawning response. Everyone knows fight or flight, but fawning is the forgotten response. It's the instinct to please, pacify, or accommodate in order to stay safe. A child who grew up with unstable or emotionally volatile caregivers learns that the fastest way to avoid conflict is to comply, to soothe, to make yourself agreeable. This response becomes a default setting in adulthood, making you highly susceptible to manipulation disguised as requests, expectations, or obligations. They're not just asking, they're activating your survival instinct to appease. And third is social and operant conditioning. This is the slow training process where behaviors are rewarded or punished in subtle ways. If you learn that compliance brought approval, peace, or a moment of quiet, and resistance brought discomfort, disapproval, or emotional withdrawal, your brain naturally wires itself to avoid resistance. This is the science behind why people can control you without ever raising their voice. Your nervous system remembers the old patterns. Your body reacts before your mind even understands what's happening. Over time, this conditioning shapes 3 long-term distortions in your perception. First, you overestimate the consequences of disappointing someone. You imagine a catastrophe where there might only be a moment of friction. Second, you underestimate your right to choose. You see your options as limited, as if saying no isn't a valid path. And third, you confuse discomfort with danger. The anxiety of setting a boundary feels like a genuine threat to your safety. So you retreat. This is why manipulation works so well on you. It is not because you lack strength, it is because you were meticulously trained to survive by staying small. Now, let's talk about the emotional cost of this. Because every time someone controls you, something inside you contracts. There is a grief that builds slowly, the grief of abandoning yourself over and over again. You feel it when you agree to things you didn't want to do, when you force a laugh to hide your discomfort, when you say it's fine, even though it is absolutely not fine. This is the grief of self-betrayal, the grief of being invisible in your own life. And this grief accumulates. The psychologist Carl Jung warned, the true trauma is the abandonment of the self. People think control is about dominance, power, or authority, but the real psychological weight lands on something much deeper. To be controlled, you must disconnect from your own truth. You must put aside your boundaries, your needs, your intuition, and ultimately, your dignity, all to maintain a peace that was never yours to begin with. The core fear driving this is ancient and primal. The fear of being rejected for having a backbone. The fear of losing love because you established a limit. The fear of being punished for being honest. The fear of repeating those childhood moments where your vulnerability cost you your safety. This is why even small decisions feel heavy. Every request becomes a test. Every obligation feels like a trap. Every disagreement feels like abandonment waiting to happen. And because discomfort feels like danger, you choose to survive through silence. But it is a painful survival. It's a survival that erodes your self-respect, one compromise at a time. You're not just losing an argument, you're losing pieces of yourself. This is where it all becomes unmistakable. You begin to see how deep the programming goes when you look at your adult life. Here are the most common ways it manifests. First, you apologize before you even speak. Maybe not literally every time, but internally. You feel the constant need to justify your existence, your needs, your boundaries, as if you don't have a right to them. Second, you avoid saying no because it feels genuinely dangerous. So instead, you say, "I'll try," or "maybe," or "it's okay," even when it's not. You offer a softer, more palatable version of a boundary that can easily be pushed over. Third, you seem to attract controlling personalities, not because you seek them out, but because they are wired to sense who is trained to adapt to others. They recognize the familiar pattern of compliance. Fourth, you'll replay conversations in your mind for hours, sometimes days. You ask yourself whether you offended someone or disappointed them. This mental rumination is a leftover survival mechanism, a way of checking for threats long after the interaction is over. Fifth, you suppress your anger. For you, anger equals conflict, and conflict equals danger. So your anger never gets a chance to become healthy assertiveness. It just turns into numbness, resentment, or even self-blame. And finally, you feel responsible for other people's emotions. You were raised to manage them, to keep the peace. Now, you continue that pattern automatically, feeling guilty if someone else is upset, even if you did nothing wrong. These are not personality traits. They are not weaknesses. They are not flaws. They are these sophisticated coping strategies you built to walk through a difficult childhood. But here is the hard truth. You cannot build a free and authentic adult life using survival strategies that were designed for a powerless child. Unlearning begins with witnessing your patterns without shame, noticing the impulse to say yes, and thinking, "That's not me, that's the trained version of me." And this witnessing, this small moment of separation, is the first real step to reclaiming yourself. So how do you heal? Healing begins, not with rebellion, but with recognition. You don't have to become aggressive. You don't have to become dominant or swing to the opposite extreme. You simply have to return to yourself. Here are the real steps of healing. First, inner child repair. This means speaking directly to the younger version of you that still believes compliance equals safety. You tell that part of you, "You're allowed to exist now. You're allowed to have limits. You are safe." You give yourself the reassurance you never received. Second is boundary rehearsal. Boundaries are not confrontations. They are simply information. Start small. Practice saying no to low-stakes things. Say, "I need a moment to think about that." Each time you practice, you're training your nervous system to feel safe in self-expression, proving to your body that setting a limit won't lead to catastrophe. Third is shadow work. This means reclaiming the parts of you that you've been told were too much. Your anger, your voice, your power, your truth. These are not flaws. They are essential tools for navigating the world. Your anger, for instance, isn't a problem to be suppressed. It's a signal that a boundary has been crossed. And finally, choosing softness with yourself. People were able to control you because you were already too hard on yourself. Healing requires turning kindness inward before you can project strength outward. You must become your own ally. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." But the part we often forget is that your mind was shaped long before you consciously took control of it. Healing is not about fixing yourself. It's about reclaiming authorship over the rules you live by. Because the moment you break the internal rules that made you so easy to control, the external rules of others lose their power over you. You were not born to be controlled. You were conditioned to survive by shrinking. But survival is not the same as living. The goal is not to become harder. The goal is to become whole. If this video resonated with you, consider sharing it. Someone else needs to hear these words just as much as you did. Thank you for watching.